called The Ideal Muslim. It's translated in English. So, what I want to talk about are a few points about identity, and then get into some of the major points I think that we, as Western Muslims, need to consider as we move forward, inshallah, in this historic moment. First is that the Prophet ﷺ and his companions and the Quran teach us that there is no such thing as the perfect Muslim identity. That's fiction. But usually when you attend like summer camps, or if you go to conventions, or you're around certain communities, it's this idea that like in order to be a Muslim, it's either all or nothing. It's like you're either absolutely perfect or you're something else. And this permeates, Islamic schools. My degree, she mentions, is in education, and I traveled a few times to different Muslim institutions. And, I'd ask them, what's your educational philosophy? What is your educational philosophy? Or I would talk to Islamic studies teachers. And the conclusion that I came up with is that in reaction to modernity, right, the educational philosophy of many Muslim schools is to create, and incubate and create this perfect Muslim. So you have this tremendous stress on people. There's a study, Dalia Mujahid, she's Egyptian, so say it right. She did a study that surveyed young different demographics from different religions. The most depressed demographic in America, the other part of North America, are young Muslim males. And the study goes, post 9/11, into how does it feel to be a Muslim, and a lot of it talked about the struggle to maintain the community standards. And all of us know exactly what I'm talking about. See, a lot of us in the zone in the moment. To be concerned about, if I slip, or if I fail, or if I have a we say it's like an aib, shame, or this, or whatever, khabardar, speak Urdu, these mistakes, which oftentimes are not seen as egregious by Islam itself, but have been aggrandized by the community for a number of reasons. One is cultural reasons, right? Within a given cultural mechanism, certain things are kind of sometimes exploited or blown up more. Secondly, the fact that, quote unquote, we're a minority community. So minority communities tend to have, idealized notions of other communities. For example, whenever we talk about the Jewish community, we talk about them as though everything just worked out for them. Whereas in fact, read, for example, Dr. Sarna's book, History of American Judaism, is like a comedy of errors. It's very similar to us. You read there, we had these rabbis who only spoke Yiddish, so our youth wouldn't come to our synagogues. Sound familiar? We had this big debate about eating kosher meat or not, that almost destroyed our community. Sound familiar? We had this big debate about buying houses on mortgage or not to use a mortgage. Can our kids marry outside of the Yiddish, cultural tradition or not? It's all the same stuff. It's very interesting. But when we talk about other communities, we tend to idealize them because we have these false notions of utopia. And the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he warned us about this. He warned what this would do to our community. When I converted to Islam, I remember, my name was changed the night I became Muslim. I was given milestones by Sayyid Qutb, a thobe, and some really strange, stinky oil. And I was told, now you're a Muslim. There wasn't someone to sit down with me like a case manager. No, a convert needs a case manager. And say to me, you are about to go through some crazy stuff, man, with your parents. You're about to go through I was 20 years old. You're about to experience a lot of things that are going to challenge you, and hey, we have someone who has done that before you that will help you walk through this process. And that, again, is rooted in, this idea of to be Muslim means to be perfect. To the point that our institutions, we'll talk about this tomorrow, don't really deal with reality. They don't really want to address reality. So I remember in the community in Boston, when I moved to Boston, shortly there, after 3 or 4 days, I was in my office. Young Arab, 2 young Arab sisters walked in my office. Our brother, will begin stuff like this. He has a demon, and you need to help him out. And he has a demon possession, and we really need you to do something for him. So I said, okay, bring him to me. So they brought him to me. I asked him a few basic questions that was very important, very obvious from a clinical point of view. He had been abused by He didn't have a jinn. Someone was abusing this kid. So then I asked him in Arabic, like, who's hurting you? And then he said, of course, tell my sister to leave because Alashan the aid. Right? I don't want to shame myself. And then we found out he'd been sodomized in the YMCA forcefully. Right? Then I went to the community and I was like, do you have clinicians in this community? Do you have people who can offer mental and emotional health care to this young man? And they were like, astaghfirullah, we're going to reveal all of our problems to the people. Astaghfirullah, we're going to, we're going to turn this place into a home of heathens. And I said, no, you're going to help people with their faith and speak to reality. So one of the greatest problems we have as a community is this utopic vision we have of ourselves. To the point that we won't deal like ISIS. Oh, it's a conspiracy. It's not Muslims. Muslims will never do that. How many of you live in Muslim countries? You've seen some Muslims do some ghetto stuff. I'm saying that with respect, right? I use ghetto in the most nomadic, Nazi type way, not in a bad way. But the point I'm saying is, like, but because we're so worried about this pristine, protective ideology, this ethos of protection, like we're protecting the sacred religion of Muhammad, you're not that big to protect his religion. Allah will protect his religion. And what that does is it makes us acutely irrelevant to ourselves and to others. And we fail to address the real problems that are in front of us. And the Prophet warned us about this. He said something really awesome. He said, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, inna dina yusr. He said, religion is ease. No one will make this religion hard on themselves except they're going to lose. Except they're going to lose. And then the Prophet said, فَصَدِّدُوا وَقَارِبُوا. In Arabic it's really awesome. He said, like if we were to put a target in the back of the room and shoot arrows at it, how many of us would even hit the target? Let alone how many of us would hit the center. So the word he used wasn't not to hit the target, but to try to. Right? And in Arabic, this is isti'ara, it's rhetoric. So what he's saying is, try your best, like make your best effort. You're probably not going to hit the target, but at least you put something into it. And seek to draw nearer to God. And the Prophet ﷺ, actually our scholars, they coined a really cool axiom based on all of this, a legal axiom, based on a beautiful narration from Abu Hurairah, where the Prophet ﷺ said, وَمَا أَمَرْتُكُمْ بِهِ فَأْتُوا مِنْهُ مَا اسْتَطَعْتُمْ. What I ordered you to do it as best you can. And also Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said to us in the Quran, فَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ مَا اسْتَطَعْتُمْ. Be dutiful to Allah as best you can. As best you can. Before you get happy and think like, oh snap, this is great, I can go on vacation. No. Istita'a, or as best you can, the best example I can give you is like someone who's in a room, like those, I don't know if you have this in Canada, right? Where they have those, like, you get like an hour to grab whatever you want from your favorite shopping center. You can just like use one card, you can get whatever, and you see people like just going crazy, right? That's istita'a. So when Allah says, فَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ مَا اسْتَطَعْتُمْ, it means to put forth that maximum effort. But utopic visions are rare. And they're dangerous and they're crippling. And if we look at the Prophet, peace be upon him, it's very awesome, He dealt with this in his community. He dealt with problems in a very open way. Sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi sallam. For example, problems in worship. Think about how for many of us, like, going to the mosque is an intimidating affair. Going to a gathering where maybe there are Muslims, you feel like scared. You might make a mistake, might screw up, so on and so forth. But if you see the Prophet, he doesn't have this goal of utopia. That, as I said, sometimes the community goes beyond it. And there's a word for this utopic vision, it's called the Khawarij. The ideology of that level of extremism, the other is hyper-dispensation, leads us to the Khawarij, leads us to making things haram that Allah made halal, making the halal Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made haram. And oftentimes it happens in the name of following the Salaf Salih. But the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, we find in Sahih Muslim, this man, he becomes Muslim, and he hears from the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam that he learns, the first thing he learns is a convert, if somebody sneezes, you say, Yarhamakallah, may God have mercy upon him. God bless you, right? And it's awesome, prayer, it's a silent prayer. This is the Prophet's mosque. The Prophet is leading the prayer. Someone sneezes. What do you think this new convert does? He's jacked up, he's juiced, he's amped, he's piety. I just learned this from the Prophet. If someone sneezes, I say, Yarhamakallah. So someone sneezes, what do you think he yells out in the middle of the prayer? He says, Yarhamakallah. And then nobody responded to him. So he knew that you're supposed to respond. So then he's talking in the salah to them. What's wrong with you guys? Why don't you answer me? And then he says something, I cannot say it in Arabic here. We never invited me back. But the scholars of Hadith quoted it and mentioned it. Why? Because they kept it real. If it was up to us, we're like, I think we should erase that part. Okay? And we'd have lost it. But Bukhari was like, this is what happened. Imam Muslim was like, this is what happened. Actually, he said in Arabic, he said, I'll translate it, he said, your mother should have miscarried you. It doesn't get much worse. After that, there's only a few other words you can say in Arabic that you may go beyond that, right? Then he said that people started beating their legs with their hands. And he said, I realized that they wanted me to be quiet, so I became quiet. And afterwards, the Prophet said, where's the person who was talking? You know? And they said, it was that new guy. And the Prophet said, come here. And then he said, he said, I've never seen anyone better behave than him. He didn't yell at me. He didn't insult me. He didn't hit me. He didn't make a face. He didn't do anything. He just told me, hey, this prayer is just for tasbih, takbir, to say Allahu Akbar, subhanallah, but don't talk. So that was my experience with the Prophet. The Prophet had all this utopian vision of people. He understands how people are. He understands how people are. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in Sahih Bukhari, there was a man who made ruku in the doorway of the masjid. He's so excited to catch the salah, right? So, like now, when we see people run to prayer, we should flip it. We should be marketers. Instead of saying, astaghfirullah, why do you guys run to prayer? Goodness gracious, Usain Bolt is in the masjid. Like, what's going on here? And we should say, mashallah, may Allah reward you guys for your enthusiasm. You're so excited, you're running to salah. You know? Sell it. Even though they know that's not why they're running, right? But you touch them. So the man, he makes ruku in the doorway and he rushes to prayer so he can catch the prayer. So he walks like a duck, yani, to the saf. And he joins the prayer like that. He's walking through the masjid, right? And then someone comes and tells the Prophet, this guy just did this. And then the Prophet ﷺ, he said to him, come here. He said, I was terrified. The Rawi said that I was freaking out. And then the Prophet said, Jazakallahu khairan ala hirsak. The Prophet said, may Allah reward you for your enthusiasm, but don't do it anymore. That is how he dealt with difficulties and hardships. Even at a social level. Many of us, if I say this, you get mad at me. You know that Omar, he drank in Medina. And for us to hear that, well, because we're too pious. Look how we translate stuff. Our translations are really bad, man. Like, I haven't read English translations in like 15 years. And I'll give you some examples of this. When this man, it's related by Bukhari and Tirmidhi, he comes to the masjid of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and that was Umar before Islam prohibited alcohol. One of my sheikhs used to say, Alhamdulillah, Allah amanta Hamza, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala caused Hamza to die before alcohol was prohibited because Hamza had an issue with alcohol. It was like a rahmah from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But here's a Sahabi who comes to the masjid. He has a social problem. Drinking was a social problem. If you read Muqayyis, he talks about his nights of binge drinking. Right? Sounds like something like the Red Hot Chili. It's like Under the Bridge by Red Hot Chili Peppers. Like, it has the same feel. If you don't know that age, you're too young. So, I'm not talking about biryani. I'm talking about a group. That's hard? No. So, he comes to the masjid and he's drunk. He's drunk, this person. And it's interesting in the narration of this hadith, usually the Sahaba will say, فَجَاءَ رَجُلٌ وَجَاءَ رَجُلٌ وَرَأَيْنَا رَجُلًا. They never say his name because they did not want to backbite him even in the narration. Look at their concern for people. That's why most of the hadith where someone is punished severely, you'll hear like فَقَدْ جَاءَتْ امْرَأَةٌ فَقَدْ جَاءَ رَجُلٌ. A person came, a woman came, a man came. Even though they all knew who that person's name was, they didn't mention their name because they wanted to preserve their sanctity till now. Right? It's very powerful. So the Sahabi comes to the masjid of the Prophet and he's drunk. First of all, the fact that he goes to the masjid is incredible. And then secondly, who does he ask for? He asks for the Prophet. He's empowered. Even though he's struggling, he has his issues, and he has his challenges, his relationship with the Prophet. And remember this, we'll talk about this tomorrow. Your institution cannot touch the office of prophethood, metaphorically, until it embraces the office of amana. You have to be trusted first. People don't trust you, doesn't matter how much knowledge you have. People don't trust you, doesn't matter how cool your masjid looks. There is no nubuwwah before amana. He's ameen before Nabi. Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. He's the trustworthy before he's a prophet. It has to go that way. So he comes to the masjid, he seeks the help of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. People begin to make fun of him, they begin to chastise him. In fact, you know, some narrations, people just start throwing shoes at him, right? And then the Prophet said to him, "La tu'id, don't help shaitan overcome this person. Don't help shaitan, yaghlib ali. The shaitan will dominate him because you pushed him out." So the utopic vision is not something that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam encouraged us to achieve. He encouraged us to achieve effort, all the while knowing that we're going to make mistakes. And that's sometimes why you find young Muslims in the West or old Muslims in the West, they screw up. You know, they hit the blue mint with a pineapple on top, you know. Or they do something like that. Or even, white guys laughing, blessed. I'm saying, it's all said. Or they do really egregious things. And then after that, they're like, it's over with. I'm no good. I blew it. But the Quran shows us that the utopic ideology and this perfect understanding is very problematic. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in Surah Al-Fussilat, فَاسْتَقِيمُوا إِلَيْهِ وَاسْتَغْفِرُوا. If you understand Arabic, it's really awesome. Because this is called waw al-ma'ina, which means that the conjunction is implying that both verbs are happening simultaneously. So Allah says, فَاسْتَقِيمُوا إِلَيْهِ وَاسْتَغْفِرُوا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, seek to be upright and at the same time seek His forgiveness. At the same moment that you try to have istiqamah, seek His forgiveness. So Imam al-Razi said something very beautiful. He said that this implies that people will never be perfect. So even in their efforts to draw nearer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they should be making istighfar, seeking His forgiveness. That's why the first thing we see after salah is what? Like, oh snap, I'm done. What's the first thing that we say after salah? Yeah, to remind us that even in our greatest moments of worship, we're going to have some shortcomings. So the community has to expect at an institutional level and at a philosophy. I remember when I was in MSA in the 90s, it was deep. Like if you didn't have a beard, you couldn't be in MSA. It was deep. If you didn't have on hijab, it's like you could not be in MSA. And we were proud of this. We had 3 people in our MSA. We were proud. We thought, wow, like we're so salihin, yani. And then we read like Sultan Kaf, like, see you and Ashabu Kaf, Ula Kaf, you know, like run to the cave, they all run to the cave, all these Fusaha, all these evil people. And it really just masked a lot of arrogance and hubris. So when we're talking about nurturing the identity or building the identity, the first point, and I hit on it for a long time, is not to seek this typical, I'm sorry to say this, utopic expectation. To embrace your shortcomings, to deal with your shortcomings. And that's why the Prophet, I put it on my Instagram, An-Nasu Ma'adin. The Prophet said that people like metals, right? But in order to get to metal, you have to get dirty, right? In order to get metal, you have to use people to help you. Like mines are much better than sitting and panning for gold next to a river. In order to get to gold, right, you have to put a lot of work. But absolute pure gold is a problem. It has to be a little bit tainted to be valuable. SubhanAllah. So the Prophet said, An-Nasu Ma'adin, people are like metals. Right? Because to be absolutely perfect is an impossibility. But to find our best qualities, we have to dig deep into ourselves. The second thing is that it takes time. This is not like a one-day project. You don't take a weekend course like, how to be a better person. Oh, okay, great. It's like a weekend course. I feel so much better now. Not really. Right? I still hate my little brother. What happened? I'm still mad at my husband. You know? That doesn't mean that those aren't important, but those courses are like milha al-ta'am. That's like salt on the food. Right? It's like salt on food. It's like spice on the food. But the longer, more extensive approach is where the fruit comes. And we find that, you know, Mike Tyson was like the greatest boxer ever until he was regulated to the uppercut. Right? Toronto had incredible hope until they hired Isaiah Thomas. I had to throw it in there. I'm sorry. That's a bad joke. players, right? When their skills start to wane, they become basically homewreckers. The Muslim community oftentimes you talk, oh, I'm going to go to Umrah, my life is just going to change. I'm going to get like a raise, my degree will be done, my PhD will be written, I get back, everything's been earned. Right? We grasp for these moments. And you know, the Sufis would say that these are actually masking selfishness. Like my worship is selfish. Like I want something out of worship. I don't want Allah, I want me. It's deep, right? There's this idea of I want something, especially we're in an age of hyper-narcissism where it's generation I. Like, I want. You have to like someone on Facebook before you can dislike them. Everything is about mujahada. So a person is deeply invested in themselves to the point that if they're not careful, it can spill over into their spirituality and their acts of worship. So that's why one of our teachers used to say, don't worship Allah for a buzz. You find people, oh, like I prayed Tarawih, like, oh, I pray all nights, and I fasted, da da da. Well, I just didn't feel anything. Well, who said you have to feel something? The fact that you worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala should be sufficient, sharaf for you. But that comes out of a lack of patience. Whereas we find in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, كَزَرْعٍ أَخْرَجَ شَطَأَهُ فَآزَرَهُ فَاسْتَغْلَظَ فَاسْتَوَى عَلَى سُوقِهِ. These are very important points I'm dropping on you right now. And that is that the Sahaba, listen how profound this is. The Sahaba, the great companions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Allah said they were like a seed that the weak root shot out of it. It was very weak, and then slowly it became strong and strong and strong. And then it stood on its own. So one of our scholars said that the seed is Muhammad, peace be upon him, and what shot out that was weak over time and grew were his companions. They just did not, you know, Umar was like an anomaly, okay? Abu Bakr is an anomaly. Malcolm X is an anomaly. Those are not regular people, you know what I mean? So when people convert to Islam, or young people are trying to come back to Deen, or people are engaged in Islam, we'll give them these really, really impactful stories of people who are like first-round draft picks with guaranteed contracts. Whereas, like, I personally relate to the Sahabi who screws up a lot. Like, that's my boy. Like, we can hang out. Because that guy, it's like, we go this way and Shaitan goes with us. Yeah, what's up, man? I get the whole, he went this way, Shaitan went this way. I'm like, that's incredible, but that's not. Like, and that has permeated through our history. There is an ethos in Muslim tradition that tends to undermine the humanity. And this wasn't by earlier scholars of history like Al-Dhahabi, Al-Tabarani, and others. This happened as we got into modernity, post-industrial age, the idea of presenting Islamic history vis-a-vis Western history, vis-a-vis the Enlightenment and communism and capitalism. We have our ism, and our ism is also equally as perfect. So when you read, you know, more contemporary history, it's like, these people made no mistakes. Whereas when you read Al-Dhahabi, you're like, dude, Imam Malik had bad days, man. Like, I can relate to that part. I can't relate to the guy who, like, memorized 65 hadith in one sitting, he can read them all with asanid. That's a little beyond mine. So, Imam Shafi had, you know, he was actually lonely. You know, he writes about his memoirs or periods of his life where he was lonely. How many young singles or divorcees are lonely? How many converts are lonely? Like, they'll be able to rate with Shafi'i in that aspect of his life. And he said, there are times when I'm so lonely, the only person I talk to is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Imam Abu Hanifa was a businessman. How many people are businessmen? They can relate to that aspect of his life. But the point is that it took time. Things happen over time. So you have to give yourself time. Don't expect to suddenly change. And that can root a sense of hubris and a sense of, what am I getting out of this? You know, it's funny, I have some students who study with me, and there's always this one person who comes like, I want to learn everything like right now. That's the worst student. I just want to learn everything right now. I want everything learned in Azhar in 7 years, I want to learn right now. That was 7 years, bro. It's not like I can zip file this. Right? But it masks this kind of hidden agenda. So the second point is, give yourself time. Give yourself time. Give yourself time. Now, that'll take us into the broader kind of, there's a lot of things we could talk about, but just remember, don't look for the utopic vision. You're going to make mistakes. It's funny. Have you ever talked like, quote unquote, I don't like this word, like non-practicing Muslim? Because we're all not practicing and practicing. You know what I mean? Like, someone might not pray, but they might be good to their parents. I might pray and like be real harsh on my parents. So hence, I'm practicing, not practicing. They're practicing and not practicing. Feel me? Sorry, I'm in Canada. You understand what I'm trying to say? right? So there's aspects like, so you might wear hijab, she doesn't wear hijab, but you might backbite people, like, you know, you're at the all-you-can-eat buffet at a local Middle Eastern restaurant, and she might, like, her tongue might just be always with Allah. So there's a practicing component and a non-practicing component, right? So I don't like this term, so I'm just using it just to help us see something. But have you ever talked to people who really don't practice at all? Like Muslims. And had a conversation with them? They are the most extreme Muslims ever. Like you'll ask them, for example, I have a friend. Say, man, why don't you come back to the masjid? He's like, well, I'm not Muslim anymore. How do you just make that fear for yourself? Like, how do you just say you're like, so did you? No, he's like, no, I didn't change my religion. But you know, I bought this house on interest, so I left the heat. No, we had this conversation. So I was like, no, you don't need the deen. If you buy a house on interest, he's like, you don't know, you're Azhari, you guys are very liberal, you're a convert. He started arguing with me. I said, bro, you just said you're not Muslim, and now you're arguing with me about this issue, this issue of fiqh and maqasid and this and that, and you're telling me you're not Muslim. This is my experience. I had a Muslim friend in college who drank, okay? And his understanding of Islam was like out there, very hardcore. And that would be his alibi not to what? Not to practice. But when you find people that are more deeply embedded in the community, engaged in the community, interactive with the community, then you find that organics in that humanity. And I learned this the hard way. When I was in Egypt, I studied in Al-Iftah for 2 years. It's like the place for answering questions and stuff. And I got tired of theology. You know, you study theology. The lowest point of the Iman in my life was in Azhar. Why? It's just too much information. Like, I was like, I just need to hear Suraj al-Hajj, man. I just need to forget Suraj al-Hajj right now. I need to Sheikh Zayd. I just need something a little different. In the sense that Imam Razi said, I studied so much I became doubtful. He wrote this. So I think that's what happens. You study for so long, it's after a while, it's like, what else is there left to study, man? So then I went to Dar Iftah. I said, can I volunteer? Before I got in the program, can I volunteer? Can I just sit and like answer questions in Masjid Azhar, deal with the people when they come there, right? In what's called Darasa. If you know what Darasa is in Egypt, that's basically the neighborhood that you guys never go to. So, which you should, because that's where all your Islamic history is, right? By design, it was made the worst neighborhood in Cairo to keep people away from it. I hate to say that. It's a plan. By the secularists. So, I go there, I'm sitting down, and this sheikh, he's my teacher, he's from Mansoura, mashallah, and he's like, answer this question. This lady's walking in, she has the black jilbab and the black hijab, so I'm like, oh, this is going to be easy. She tried asking me, you know, is this group right or wrong? You know, what's important questions that religious people are always thinking about, you know. Is this group right? Is this group wrong? Is this sheikh good? Is this sheikh bad? I mean, there's no other things to worry about in Egypt except that, right? So she sits down in front of me and she's like, you know, I had a friend. I was like, snap, man. You know, I had a friend, you know where that's headed, right? And then she's like, my friend did the ultimate evil, right, as a young woman. So I lost it. I was like, astaghfirullah, how could you do this? Oh my gosh, tubi ilallah, this, ala takhafi rabbak, you know, I was a really nice guy. And then the sheikh was like, stop. He told me, like, stop. He went down in front of her. I'm just going to bring in both points I talked about. The idea of looking past utopia and the idea of change takes time. And this is a great mufti in the masjid of Egypt. He doesn't work for the government. And you know CC backwards is ISIS? So, small joke. I've been thinking about it for a long time. Ibn Jinni would be happy with that. He talks about barada, you know. We have this in Arabic, so I was thinking CC is backwards. And it needs to look twice also. So, she asked this question, I lost my temper with her, I call her basically, and I can say it. I'm just letting you know what I said in Arabic. Okay, it starts with a sheen and ends with Tamabuz. No, this is history, right? I'm forgiven for my, remember, I'm not imperfect, and then give me time to change. And I'm a convert, I get the convert pass. Then, Sheikh told me, stop. Don't repeat that word. Don't repeat that word, girl. Is it this? That? Stop. Shut. Don't first day here? You know, have you ever been on a job and someone says to you, is it your first day here? That's not a good thing. Oh, this must be your first day here, right? That's like if you don't know where to park, or if you walked in the wrong office thinking it was yours because you don't even have an office yet. That's like first day here type stuff, right? She was like, is it your first day here? I was like, yeah, it's like my first 10 minutes here. And they said, you just need to be quiet. And he sat down with her, and what I saw was basically like LeBron jumping from the free throw line. I'm saying how he loved her, how he cared about her. She's like, were you raped? Are you a victim of sexual trade? Someone prostituting you? This, I mean, he gave her every possible freaking excuse you could think of. And she was like, no, she started crying. She's like, no. Waqa'tu fi shay, waqa'tu fi shay. You know, and he was like, no, but maybe this happened to you, 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 maybe this happened to you. She's like, la, you know, Egyptians, la, no. And then she said, is there tawbah for me? Is there repentance for me? Because it was me, I'm the one who did it. And then he said, yes. He said, go back to Allah and don't tell anyone what happened. And if you need help with your medical issues to be examined or whatever, I can make arrangements for you. Then afterwards, he turns to me. I'm like, yeah, well, I did something wrong myself. And he said to me, he said, you know your problem? Your problem is you read too many books. He said, books, they have veins, right? But the veins are cold and blue. These people, their veins are red and warm. It's a different ballgame. He's like, all you guys come out of the gym, yeah, same problem. Same problem. So remember this, in our development, don't look for utopia. And then secondly, give people time to change. The third is, and this is a problem in the Muslim community also, the need to change people drives us to the point that we become rude and harsh with others. And at times we don't even really care about them. We just want to see them change. I remember once I was with this group of brothers, and they asked, I'm not trying to get anyone in trouble, it just happened, okay? They're the people who ask you to go with them, you know what I'm saying? They actually go out places, right? Halal places. So I remember I was a new Muslim, I didn't know. So like, why don't you join us for 40 days? So I was like, really? Like, you're gonna pay for me, get food? I'm a new Muslim, I'm trying to get a come up, you know? And they were like, yeah, of course. And we had like really, you know, interesting cuisine, you know, curries and stuff. So I was like, wow, I work for my dad. Like, I imagine I'm a convert, I'm 20 years old. I work for my father. They're like, oh, you know what? The great people of Islam will leave their jobs for the sake of work. Dude, I left my job with 1 day's notice. For my non-Muslim father. It took me 10 years to fix that issue. The whole while they're telling me, you know, you have to be like a mujahid, you have to make da'wah for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you have to leave everything for Allah. This utopic understanding, right, wreaks havoc in my home. My father was joking, you know, I ain't coming to work today. Why, you got a girlfriend? Oh no, I'm going for these guys, right, for days, we'll hang out. He was like, you're serious. And he hung up the phone. He was like, don't come home. Right? And I remember, when I was with once another group of brothers, there was a guy from Albania, we were in college, and he had some trepidation about moving to a different city because of his green card status. Back in those days, like, I don't know how it works now in America, but you had to like stay where you were registered. And they actually talked this brother into leaving everything, putting his green card at risk. And I heard one of the brothers say, mashallah, we changed you. This need to always feel like we have to change people instead of just being freaking human. Just loving and caring deeply about people. If you want to affect people, love them. Be invested in their lives. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said about Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, وَعْلَمُوا أَنَّ فِيكُمْ رَسُولَ اللَّهِ. In Arabic, you cannot translate this literally. This is rhetoric. Allah says, even the word fi in Arabic, fi, right? Like French, you're close to Ottawa, right? It means to be in something. The water, feed the glass. So Allah, see, you got it? Man, that's something pretty cool. Why are you giggling? Not enough time with jokes. So, oh yeah, because we're on the French side, because they don't laugh at me. But anyways, so let's say, وَعْلَمُوا أَنَّ فِيكُمْ رَسُولَ اللَّهِ. Know that inside you is the messenger of Allah. You know, actually it should be وَعْلَمُوا أَنَّ عِنْدَكُمْ رَسُولَ اللَّهِ. the prophet is with you. It says the prophet is in you because he's so invested in people. It's though he's in them. He cares about them. So oftentimes, because of what I talked about earlier, especially people of da'wah, people involved in institutions, people involved in organizations, right? The idea of changing people is not really rooted in a love for them and care for them and being invested in them. Now, what we'll do from there, after talking about these three kind of individual points, and there's a simple way, quickly before I do that, to be invested in people, like ask about them. So one thing we started doing in Boston and Washington, D.C., we did community dua. So instead of having me pray for people that I don't even know, like just now, I was with Zoltan, right? It's my boy from Hungary. This is not my twin brother, by the way. I asked him, hey man, tell me about your mom. Because I thought this was like a Turk from Hungary. I'm trying to figure this brother out since I got off the plane. And he's like, I'm from Hungary. So I'm like, you gotta be Turkish. Maybe part of There's something going on here. Who's this dude? I went upstairs and I was like, who's this? And then he calls me. And then he sounds like he's from the streets. So like, yo, what's up, man? I'm downstairs. This guy's on time. There's something about him, right? Yeah. But then so I said, you want me to ask about his parents? Sleep. But then, like, I want to know about his mom. So then I said to him, as we're driving just now, he got married to a Libyan, smart man, and got his Amita going. And we're in the car, and I say, hey man, tell me about your mom. What did you tell me? Like, no one asked me about my mom. But as a convert, very few people ask me about my mom, dude. Like, I have the same experience. The only time people ask me about my mom is, did you convert them? I didn't see it. Have they accepted Islam? I understand that's from a good place, right? Like I appreciate that, but it's like, there's other aspects to my mother's relationship with me besides me bringing the pain, you know? Like, that are broader. So we started doing community dua. You should do it. What we did is say, hey people, I was in Chicago last year with Imam, which is a great organization. Chicago was the murder capital of America. As Lupe talked about, there were 22 murders in 2 months. It's like insanity. So we're there, and I was just passing through. I went to an Imam event, which is an organization that does inner city work, and they asked me to make dua, and I was like, I don't know anyone here. Like, how do you make dua for people you don't know? I mean, you can make the general dua, right, in Arabic, and leave, but like, how do we make a dua that really touches people? So I said, you know what? We'll do something different. Just say what you want us to make dua for, and we'll do it. So the African American black brother raised his hand. He said, my son was shot yesterday. Pray for him. And people were like, we didn't know that your son was shot. It's like people who think that they're his friend or his brother. Sister raised her hand. She's like, my mother has cancer. She's been fighting cancer for 2 years. I'm terrified. I don't know what to do. Make dua because she starts crying. So that's that cry moment where everyone starts crying. You have Syrian people who live in the projects who are Syrian refugees. You know, their dua is just like, my life is great. Like when you hear what they're praying for, like a can of sardines and some crackers, it's caviar. Like honestly. You know, they're talking about, my husband is in this camp, my children are in this camp, I don't know where my daughter is. The UN said she's okay, and one of them's in Jordan. And it's like, I'm worried about my 5 years. Like, so then people started making, and we could not stop it. So community dua, right? Community fellowship opportunities. That creates a sense of love, because what happened was, when people were saying these things, their friends started crying and they were saying, like, what kind of sister am I? I don't even know you're going. We had a sister say, I have eating disorders. Like her best friend's like, I've been with you for 5 years. I eat with you every day. What do you do? She's like, I throw up. That's what I go do. I go throw up. Then she goes to the restroom every day after I eat with you. And then she was like, SubhanAllah, what kind of sister am I? Like, I'm not even invested in her to the point that I notice little things about her. So the last point is the idea of wanting to change everyone, not caring about them. And that's rooted in the sickness. So our identity should be one that embraces, I'm not saying that you go out and make mistakes. And that's how insecure are. You saying Suhaib Webb is encouraging people to make mistakes? That's that insecurity thing. Come on, I'm actually saying that. Did I stand up there and say, Ayyuha shabab, oh young people, go make mistakes. Go forth and make kabair. I didn't say that. But that's that that insecurity boogeyman that haunts our community. The one who, when you, like, for example, I put a picture, I was at a Palestinian's house, hello, when you're at their house, you're going to eat good. And this brother made an omelet with turkey bacon, mashallah, right? And I'm from Oklahoma, like, we can cook omelets, right? So then I put a picture on Instagram, and someone's like, what's that pink stuff next to it? Like, what is that? Is that bacon? I'm like, yeah, right. I put a big old slab of pork on my Instagram so the whole world could call me out. Like, but that's that problem that we have. Like, we're too utopic, so we freak everyone out by doing the littlest things. Like, you know, like, it's just like, yeah, so, like, you know, I'm taking this class with some men in there, you know, it's really interesting. There's, like, a lot of guys, and somebody like, well, you know, you're not supposed to, like, you know, what are you doing, bro? Right? It creates this strange vibe. Undoubtedly, someone tonight will question, like, it's mixed in this room. Listen. There is a difference between, like, a brothel and a mosque. There's a difference between a place of ill repute and a lecture. But because we're so insecure and so utopic, we sexualize ourselves to the point we become pervs. No, it's true. You know what I'm talking about. I was in a community, back to utopia, who has the security glass in the back that you can't see through. Where, like, the brother is getting, trying to get your hair done, and then you're like, yo, he edged your hair real good, because the mirror is, like, perfect. The only thing is, like, millions of women can see you. But you can't see them. It's true. Just like that window back there. Just like that window back there. Just kind of like that. And I got a call from an auntie, a chachi Suhaib. You know chachis? I own the auntie here, by the way, so you better watch this. And she was like, Beta, which means my little boy or something. She was like, I need to talk to you because this woman is in her 80s, man. Okay, I'm not saying this to disrespect anyone. I'm not trying to objectify women. So there's a gender studies program on this campus. Have mercy on me, okay? So she said to me, Beta, I had to turn off the light. So some woman called me, other woman like, who turned off the lights? Right? Someone turned off the lights during Tarawih. Now we can't focus anymore. It's all dark. Our kids are running around. Because we know our husbands can't wait to take care of the kids. And I would run around, turn up things, and then someone turned off the lights and became like something I like saw. I have a crazy sense of humor, by the way. I'm not utopic, right? I'm not really. I don't call myself Imam for purpose. I'm just a simple person, and I have a crazy sense of humor. So saw what's going on over there. She calls me, they're doing 20 rakats, so it's a long, extended version, the Blu-ray version. extra scenes. And she's like, I had to turn off the lights because this is a woman in her 80s, man. Because I saw the men looking at me through the glass window. This is like a Jimmy Fallon. So I was like, hold on, wait a minute. Like, first of all, let's get this straight. You are a great grandmother. Secondly, we can't see through the glass. They're like, I have to say how I know that, which is kind of problematic. I was looking for my kids, yeah. And then secondly, like, nobody likes you. Nobody trying to get your number. Like, waiting after Tarawih, like, hey, what's going on? We have to do that walker. So messed up, and it's so messed up that that happened to me. The point I'm saying is that utopic vision has created a sense of patriarchy in our community that is demoralizing and debasing to women, to the point that it forces young girls at a young age, right, to start to think about their sexuality way before they should even engage it. In many cases, the Muslim community reinforces sexuality that would have been naturally learned later on in life. And it creates this commodification of people, which is nasty. So I want you to think deeply about those 3 points. That utopic vision plays out in gender, plays out in race, plays out expectations of converts, expectations of immigrant children, you name it, it all goes there. And it leaks into policy of institutions that we'll talk about tomorrow. Second thing is, give yourself time, man. Change takes time. You know, I remember I spoke Nisa, it's the hardest chapter in the Quran. I didn't understand Arabic when I memorized the Quran. So it was a lot more. And, you know, so he said, every verse is like, wakana, 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 wakana. So I was like, yo, man, this is wakana. I don't know what this means. Wakana Allah ghafur rahim, wakana Allah azizun hakim, wakana Allah alim hakim. And I was like, right? So I memorized it. My teacher was very happy because he was like, whoever memorized the Surah Nisa, it's like they memorized the whole Quran. So I go there, I read it, I made at least 1 terabyte of mistakes. Like, it was crazy. From the first page, and I start crying. I was a grown man crying. He said, every item has been in front of this surah crying like you're crying. Because it takes time. And the third point we talked about was being a community that's invested in people, that cares about people, man. You know, there's a beautiful point in the Quran you should think about, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Imam Razi talks about this, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, An-nasu, 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 people, people, people. He doesn't say Al-Muslimun, Al-Mu'minun. But the siyaq, the context of the verse is like Muslims. It should say Muslims. It should say believers, but instead it says people. Like, Kama amana an-nasu. It doesn't say Kama amana al-mu'minun. Wa min al-nasi. Right? In other places. Good and bad. Al-Razi said that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying people instead of believers and Muslims in these verses, the context for that is to say to us that your Islam and your faith, and that's why there's an alif lam on it, an-nasu, the perfect people, that if you're really living your faith properly, it should cause you to experience the height of humanity. It should cause you to actualize what's great about being a person. So instead of saying believers, he says an-nas. It's deep. Now, let's just hit on a few points and we'll finish inshallah ta'ala, because, you know, folks got things to do. And I'm just joking. So, you can smile, it's okay. You know, and that's one thing in community dua. We had this sister, she raised her hand, she was like, oh, we ask Allah to give us some good men. There's no good men in the community. I've been single since I was born. And then people laughed, right? And then her brother, because you know how we roll, brother raised his hand, he was like, well, ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to hook us up with some great women. And then this girl's like, stop Allah, how can you laugh in dua? I said, you should laugh and cry in dua if you really do it right. There should be a moment, Allah said, وَبِذَلِكَ فَلْيَفْرَحُوا. Allah said, celebrate with Allah. But then also times that we cry with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the last point that I'll touch on is dealing with our place in society, just a few issues. Number one is, we find sometimes online, on forums, through certain magazines, the idea that, you know, as Western Muslims, we really are out of place, we have no place here, Islam is not meant to be here, we need to live. Now, the Prophet ﷺ, we read, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, Allah is the Lord of all things. So that in itself is a very powerful statement. That's a universal statement that allows us to really have broad expectations about our roles in different societies. Our beloved Prophet ﷺ said, جُعِلَتِ الْأَرْضُ مَسْجِدًا طَهُورًا. The earth, the entire earth was made for me a masjid. Sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. But are there any like examples of this? Like, were there any Sahaba who like were like us? It's a really important question to talk about. Like, are there any kind of similar analogies that can be made between certain Sahabi and us? So there was one Sahabi, his name was Fudaik. You reminded me of him, subhanAllah. Barakallahu feek. You saved my speech, man. And, still. And that is, I just read. And that is that he lived in Yemen. I don't know if you have any people here from Yemen. Oh, okay, we'll get some Asif later on. So, I read with a sheikh from Al-Ed for years. So, Ed is a place. So, Fudaik, he came from an area of Yemen that was all Christian. He was Muslim. And he accepted Islam at a time when making the migration to Medina was, you know, there were 6 like different periods of migration to Medina. 6 different times where it was an absolute obligation, where it was recommended, and then even where it wasn't allowed. So he accepted and embraced Islam at a time where migration was an obligation to Medina. Right? Pay attention, this is kind of cool. He comes to Medina to make bay'ah to the Prophet ﷺ, to pledge his fidelity to the Prophet ﷺ. And the Prophet ﷺ meets him, and then he tells the Prophet about his situation. Like, my people are Christian, you know, my parents are there, my family's there. Should I stay in Medina or what? And this is read by Imam Ahmed with a good isnad. The Prophet ﷺ said to him, establish the prayer, right? Pray. Pay zakah. Call to the good. Forbid the evil. And ish, you must live with your people. He ordered him to go back, to live in Al-Yaman and live with his people. Now, because of this, historically, there's been this discussion about the land of Islam and the land of war. You've all heard about it. Dar al-Islam, Dar al-Harb. Land of Islam, land of war. If you watch Fox News, yeah, it was like every day, every hour. But if you look historically, we find that that designation came almost 200 years after the Prophet ﷺ. There's one hadith, لا رب في الحرب إلا في دار الحرب. There's one narration attributed to the Prophet Tabarani and Al-Kabir that the Prophet ﷺ said there's no interest in war except in the land of war, but this hadith is not strong, it's fabricated. So the word Dar al-Islam, Dar al-Harb, it didn't come from the Prophet ﷺ. It's not used by the Quran. And the word, the land of peace, is not found in the Quran. It's not found in any of the reliable traditions of the Prophet ﷺ, nor the early generations. So the question is, like, when did all this start? It started in the time of Harun Rashid. The time of Harun Rashid, he asked somebody who actually was a student of Imam Abi Hanifa, Muhammad Shaybani. He asked him, Sif ayyamana hadihi. Harun Rashid asked him, hey, describe like the political scene that we're in now. So he said, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, daruhum daru harb wa daruna daru al-Islam. This is where it all started. He said, O leader of the believers, their land is a land of war, ours is a land of Islam. This is where it started. This predates a Shafi'i, who dies 204, by about 40, 30 years. Imam Shafi'i comes after this person and says, this designation is not really cut it. He said, so we have lands of treaties, lands of war, lands of peace. After Imam Shafi'i comes Ash-Shashi. Ash-Shashi is a great Hanafi scholar of Usul. Sorry, I had to get a little Ezra with you for a minute, not all jokes. And Shashi, he's like, you know what? This is not really the Quran. Like, the Quran doesn't say land of war, land of peace. The Quran just says people who believe as Muslims and people who don't. So he actually flips it on its head and says, the land where people have accepted faith, the lands where people believe in something else. Why am I telling you this? To show you that this changed over time. There's epistemology here. It wasn't just like land of war, land of peace. Because now, one time I gave this talk and this guy stood up and he was like about to break a neck, man. He's like, no, land of war, land of peace, it's it. I was like, but it's not the Quran. I don't care. It's like, wow, okay. I don't give a, okay. About you, okay. I get it. But then after him comes Al-Mawardi, Ash-Shafi'i. He wrote this great book, Ahkam al-Sultaniyya, about political rules and how you engage people. These are the Huntingtons of their age, the Foucaults of their age. These are political theorists, sociologists, right? So their theories aren't wacky. That's what I want us to understand. He says, you know what? I don't agree with any of this. He said, my theory of Dar al-Islam, based on the Hadith of Fudayk, is that wherever you can practice the basics of Islam, that's your Dar al-Islam. That's why I told you the Hadith meaning. So I said that that's kind of cool, right? The Hadith of Ahmed, he uses it. He says, when he comes to the Prophet ﷺ and says, listen, this, but I live in a Christian country. The Prophet says to him, stay there, you have to stay there. Now that takes us to something that happened in the 10th century, which is really cool. And that is a great scholar called Ibn Hajar al-Haythami. He was a legal genius. He was from Egypt, of course, was Skandaria coming in. And he wrote this book called Al-Fatwa al-Kubra, which basically collects all the major opinions of the Shafi school. And he was asked by a group of Muslims who lived in a land of non-Muslims, is it an obligation to leave our land? Are we allowed to be Muslim in this place, basically? And I know for many of us, this is like, I don't need to think about it, but I want to give you some ammunition to deal with some of the clowns. You know what I mean? Like, my job is to provide you information, necessarily not because you aren't convinced, but that when people try to box you into, like, Anwar al-Awlaki, who his entire thesis basically with Western Muslims was like, you should be there. That's how he started his ethos, although he was an engineer and never properly trained. Here we need to have some ammunition in order to be advocates. What we need from you, don't say, oh, we're not scholars. Yeah, but you can be an advocate. Right? 2008 election in America wasn't won because Obama's a brilliant legal mind. Right? It was won because he was able to create advocacy across the scales. So here he says that this statement, Imam Ibn Hajar al-Haythami, when he was asked, do we have to leave this land and come to the land of the Muslims? He said, based on the hadith of al-Amr, because the Prophet said to him, you have to stay with your people. Listen to his answer, man. I'll quote it to you. He said, as for those people who live in those lands, if they're able to establish the basis of their religion, like salah, zakat, hajj, fasting, they're able to talk about their faith freely. They're able to engage in society. They have economic stability. They're able to take care of their families to some degree. And what he would probably say if he lived here was institution building, what we're going to talk about tomorrow, inshallah. He said, according to the opinion of the Imam, he means that Shafi'i and his madhab, it is an obligation for them to stay there and not leave. When I read this answer, I was like, oh, hold on, wait a minute, man. This is not what you hear. This is not what you usually hear. And that's the purpose of the tradition. The tradition is a means for inspiring us to live for the future. Traditionalism is the idealization of personalities and opinions that keeps us stagnant and not able to live for the future. One is a cult, one is a source of inspiration. So he said it's an obligation to stay there, and then he said why? Because those people will achieve the greatest objective. God has put you in this country, man, and put me in my situation from Oklahoma, okay, to achieve one of the greatest objectives ever is to talk about faith, to be someone of faith. The second, and we'll stop here, is that as the Muslim community continues to grow and becomes more diversified, which I think is actually great, because for a lot of times it was just 3 people in MSA, right? And the needs of the community grow, we're going to see a change in how institutions function. I personally believe that masajids are not like shopping strips. They're not Walmarts. You have Walmart again? I haven't been here in 10 years. I was banned. Okay? I don't know. I just remember Tim Hortons and bagels. And there was this Egyptian woman here that has crazy mulukhiyah. This is all I remember. Yasser. Yasser. You gotta be Yasser Amr, right? So, she was on Hafidahullah. So, masajid have tried and they're doing a great job of becoming like Walmarts. Like youth group, sisters programming, college programming, college, this. But honestly, nonprofits can't do it all, man. It's gonna eventually fall on its head. So I believe that masajid need to be places that, first and foremost, facilitate worship. That's why it's called a masjid. And the masjid has ahkam, right? Masajid have certain rulings. But as we continue to grow and diversify, whether good, bad, or the ugly, you're going to start to see institutions pop up in communities that serve specific interests. For example, I left a 70,000 square foot mosque, right, where I was an imam, okay, and moved to something called Makespace in Washington, D.C. What is Makespace? Makespace is a mosque for the Muslims, man. Like, that's what we do. Our job is focused on a mosque for the Muslims. How did it start? Imam Zia, but he's from Afghanistan, so he says Zia. Imam Zia, who's Patan, he was in the masjid, and the Sopranos, basically, the board, ran him out. So what did he start to do? He started to lead prayer in a local Shah Nawaz restaurant. Of course! So he's making Tarweeh and Shalimar. 2,000 people started coming to the These were people who were saying to him, like, with all respect, I don't have a problem with the masajid, but I've had bad experiences. Like, I'm trying to rebuild myself. So he said, Yafsahil wulakum. As Allah says, make space, Allah will make space for you. So he created something called make space. That's just one demographic. We're going to start to see multiple needs in our community. The sisters who open up this mosque in California, I know everyone's angry about it. I haven't really got into this issue. But at the same time, have you ever asked women what it's like to be Muslim in a Muslim community? If the facilities aren't nice. As one brother, one sheikh, he posted on Facebook, for all of those who are mad, what we should do is for the next 2 months, we should invert the prayer quarters and have the men pray on the sister side and the women pray on the brother side and see what happens. In London, you don't have this problem as far as I know. But in other communities, it's not a good thing. So institutions are going to have to change and be able to foster this identity that we talked about earlier, to address the idea that the utopian vision is very dangerous. And thirdly, engage in a new way of leadership. And I'll talk about that tomorrow. Because the way that we've set up institutions and the way that they're led in at least the other part of North America is that you have 3 or 4 people making decisions for everybody. And it's not appropriate. So institutions are going to be sources of inspiration, encouragement, right? There's going to be accountability in institutions. There's very little accountability in institutions. There's transparency. There's very little transparency in Muslim institutions. And then there's going to be community involvement. People need to appropriate their experience. So I'll stop here, inshallah ta'ala. There's a lot to talk about. It's a heck of a topic. But just to review quickly what we said. We said at an individual level, as well as institutional, like group level, MSA, and so on and so forth, we should avoid these purely utopian notions. Think about the 3 people who said, like, I'm going to fast the rest of my life, I'm going to pray every single night, never sleep. The other one said, you know, I will never get married. The Prophet ran to them and said, no, your understanding is wrong. He corrects their understanding, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. He goes against this utopian vision. In fact, Allah says, لَا تَغْلُوا فِي دِينِكُمْ. Do not become extreme in your religion. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said to the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, very beautifully, لَا يُكَلِّفُ اللَّهُ نَفْسًا إِلَّا وُسْعَهَا. Everybody will know this statement of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran. The second thing that we said after that is that to change takes time. Avoid quick changes. And it's not about how you dress. Right? Fashion. You know, Imam Ibn Taymiyyah was asked about from a group of people who lived in non-Muslim lands. Should we dress like non-Muslims? He said, those of you who live in the lands of non-Muslims, and what's halal, you should dress like them. When he's asked why, he said, number 1, you'll protect yourself. Number 2, you'll create ta'awun amongst yourselves. You will be able to engage with each other at a higher level. You know, I understand the importance sometimes, like I'll wear a thobe or I'll wear a turban, and I'll rock that, right? Every once in a while. But not usually. But again, the utopic insecurity crisis. If a brother's not working a thobe, we'll look down on him. Someone's not dressed a certain way, which has no, actually according to the Malikis, no reward. Your dress brings no reward for you. Your need is. So Imam Ibn Taymiyyah said you protect yourself and you create this ta'awun with each other. You create this relationship with others, sense of taqarrub and closeness with them. The third thing we said is we have to be invested in people. We do that through institution building. At an individual level, I'm nice to my neighbors. At an individual level, I'm volunteering in things in the community, outside the Muslim community. Look at Imam Zayn al-Abidin, the great-grandson of Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu. You know when he died, this is incredible. When he died, the number of zakat applications increased 25% in his time. So the collectors of zakat were confused, like, how suddenly do we have this massive number of requests for zakat? How does it happen? And they found out because he died, he used to give charity to people. So his death has a systemic impact. The goodness is felt amongst the people around him. In Egypt, those of you from Cairo, you should really go to Dar al-Ahmar and Dar Rasa, those old neighborhoods. Look at the minarets in the Mamalik Masajid.
Siri not available. Connect to the internet.
Siri's a dude. So is matriarchy. Siri has to be a man. So, I have Siri too. We hang out. I'm not going to tell you my nickname. I'll let, maybe if you, I'll let Zul talk. So, you want to hear it? You want to hear it? You're not going to laugh? I'm on phone's off. I'm going to laugh. So, you were like,
Brother. Drop something.
I'll get it afterwards. So, The last point is to be concerned about people. If you go to Cairo, to the old neighborhood, and you look at the minarets, you're going to notice that they're different than any minarets in Cairo. And I was walking with my teacher through that area, but that was the way that I had a sheikh, he was blind, Sheikh Ali Saleh, he was blind, the Red Mohamed Arab. And we were walking, and there were these bathtubs. They looked like bathtubs, like from the country. I remember my grandfather, they had like a bathtub in the yard. Right? Thank God it wasn't being used by the time I was born. It was really awkward, but it was like a bathtub in the yard. Old cast iron bathtub. Right? And to move it, yeah, rugby. Okay? So I saw these like cast iron tubs. And I said to him, Ya Sheikh al-Ahwal, you know, what's up with all these like bathtubs? He's like, Waqfu kila. Waqfu kila. He said there was a time in Egypt where there were dogs run around, right? And people were scared that if a dog died, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has him. So they created a walk for dogs, and they put water in these tubs in the summers, so the dogs wouldn't die of thirst. Now we're worried about dogs in our taxi cabs. We're so stupid. We're dumb. We're so extreme and so insecure that we became stupid. Like, wallah. Like you'll be in a park and someone, hey, hi, hey, friend, and your dog. Are you okay? It's like a vine. It's like watching a vine. Whereas that was a community of rahmah, hatta asasu, walk for dogs, man. A charitable trust for dogs was created. Right? Then, same sheikh, I noticed these minarets. So I asked him, man, I didn't say man, but Samahat Maulana. I said, hey, this minaret's different. Walk for two. That was a walk for birds. People used to hang seeds on this minaret for birds to eat from because they had a walk for birds. Right? So you see a community that historically was so invested in things around them and so concerning that that's how they mobilized hearts. I had a friend of mine, he looks like he could be Hindu. His name is Ruh al-Alam. What a name. That is a name and a half. You know, spirit of the universe. You know what, the Philistine, he actually designed the PlayStation 2 back then. He designed the logo for them. He's a genius. He's an incredible person. He lived in Egypt. He studied Arabic for a while. So he told me this story about humanity, where he went to Palestine and he went to Masjid al-Aqsa. And he was doing his pictures and his art stuff. I love it. I can't get it. I love Banksy, but I just can't get it. I don't know how to do it. And this guy comes up to him and he's like, he's a Palestinian. He's like, who are you? He's like, I'm a photographer and like I'm taking pictures. He's like, have you had lunch yet? He's like, lunch? He's like, no, I'm taking pictures. He's like, no, why don't you go to my house to have lunch? So they go to their house, and you know, mashallah, Palestinians get thrown down, right? And they hook him up. Then the guy says, you know what? I forgot to ask you your name. Like, you're my house, dude. He's like, my name is Umayr, because he didn't roll Alam to the Arabs. Scare people to death. Spirit of the world. And you know what this man said to him? I didn't know you're Muslim. I just thought you were hungry. He said, I just thought you were hungry. Just want to feed you. And he was like, man, the humanity, that experience in this human being, made me say, La ilaha illallah. So as a community, I personally have never experienced the beauty and humanity that I have with Muslims ever. It's incredible. You know those like righteous Muslim people you meet are just like soft men, and they're just so sincere, right? That's really where we have to be in society. The da'wah will follow that. The da'wah is a tail to that. You know, look at the Arabs that run, and they say Prophet Muhammad is more generous than wind blowing. Right? Halima, you know, they're not even sure if she became Muslim, but she died in Medina. You know, the guide of the Prophet from Mecca to Medina, you know, they're not sure he ever Aslam, but the Prophet ever became Muslim, but the Prophet always had this great respect and honor for him. So the last point is extremely crucial, to be invested in people, man, to care about them, man. To be worried about Eric Garner, man. This person is brutally murdered. To be concerned about what happened in Ferguson, not because it's hip and cliche. Not because that's the, that's the latest thing that makes me look, bohemian online. No, because we care about people. And then the last points we made are, the first was the theological basis for living here and being part of where we are and being engaged. And then the last point I talked about was institution building. We'll talk about that tomorrow, inshallah. Barakallah feekum. Jazakumullah khairan.
So we're gonna have questions, Q&A, but okay, yeah. So we're gonna have Q&A shortly, but for those of you that haven't, this is an opportunity for you to fill out the questions on the cue cards.
But we need to have compassion. And also realize not everybody. See, Western Islam is not about liberal or conservative. It's about embracing both. Right? Because both have a place to play in our community. We need the strictness of Ibn Umar and the relaxed nature of Ibn Abbas. And you have to have both. You need the rusa, you need the azima. It's not about this or that. I talk about this, we didn't have time, the ideological battles in the Muslim community. Are we going to be like this? We're going to be liberal? We're going to be conservative? No, why can't we just Venn diagram it and just kind of let everyone flow and work together? And you know what? I don't agree with you on this issue. Okay, so what? I don't agree with you, don't agree with me. Okay, how come not? Imam Shafi'i, one time he was arguing with one of his students became so angry he stood up and ran away from him. The Shafi'i, he ran to him, see one of those imperfect moments. He ran to him and said, don't forget we're brothers, man. And don't forget the end of the day, we're still family, we're still cool. So it's not about liberal, conservative, it's about creating institutions that dynamic individuals can flow through. People who have maybe different outlooks can function in, right? And you create a broader ethos that, hey, you know what, we accept you, man. You don't have to feel threatened. Because where we're headed now is this war of liberal, conservative. It's going to be a problem. Where it should be no, let's try to work for each other. Agree on areas we agree on, different on issues that we differ on. So education is one. The older generation, honestly, I don't think we should really approach them with these kind of things, man. I think we have to respect them, like my Ammo Ala, from Khalil. I can't just go to him and be so I have this dispensation, this issue of rukhsa. He's like, what? He's 80, right? So you just have to respect those people. Right? Those types of people don't have to necessarily change them. Older generations. Again, I don't have to feel powerful by changing them. I should feel empowered to embrace them and somehow make it work. Right? Great institutions in America are institutions in here and across the world. And the Prophet was an institution, if you want to look at it that way, that brought multiple personalities and multiple philosophies under a larger banner and brought them together to function. The dynamic nature of the Sahaba is actually a miracle. Think about how many times Abu Bakr and Umar got in fights. A lot, man. But they kept it 100. They kept it as brothers, even though they got into arguments. Hafsa and Aisha went at it. But they maintained their relationship. Even Abbas and Aisha, after the death of the Prophet, had a number of very public disputes about legal issues. But who comes to see her on her deathbed is even Abbas. And she's like, please forgive me, please forgive you. I'm a Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. I know we have these issues between us. He's like, it's all good, Mom. So, again, and I'll say something. Our inability to differ and allow difference is, again, rooted in this utopic idea that we can't differ. We just have to be perfect. So then when we do differ, it's real ugly and nasty. Whereas it's just part of the process. At the end of the day, what's going to happen? So I think education, younger generations, I'll talk about that tomorrow. I'll give you a curriculum of some classical texts that I think can hopefully work out for you, inshallah. So, what JAK, which means I think Jazakallah Khair, or just ask Chris, before we talk, please, what are his suggestions to break the barrier for the practice partition between women? Oh, come on, man. So this is what I did. I'm pro-choice. I'm pro-choice. That's why I did my community. When I was Imam, I'm pro-choice. It means you want to have partition, go ahead. You don't want to have partition, go ahead. We need to have no and go ahead. Pro and no, cool. Because I'm not a woman. You know what I mean? Like, I don't have a right to tell you, girl, pray like this. I wish I did. Just joking. But I don't. So I left it to the sisters. You know? And it was like 50-50. And it was generational, man. Right? 50% were like, we want to pray behind the partition. Other 50% were like, we don't want to. And so the masjid had to make arrangements. Because at the same time, they're like, women, like, we bring our children in, sometimes we need to nurse them. Hello. Right? I'm like, yeah, that makes sense to me. I never thought about that before because I never nursed nobody. And then, like, you know, they're like, sometimes we like to talk during the lecture, so we're like, no. I could play Uno. Right? If the question is about participation, because of the handwriting in my eyesight is not good. So tomorrow I'll talk about a community model which I think empowers everybody to lead. Because rightfully so, there are a lot of young American Muslims, Canadian Muslims, Western Muslims, women, youth, professionals who feel that they're not being heard in the community. And this is boiling, by the way. It's boiling. It's getting hot. Is there a leadership model we can adopt as institutions that will empower all of the community to make decisions, not just 3 or 4 people? I'll share that with you tomorrow, inshallah. Oh man, this is my handwriting, man. Right, so person's asking, this is a brilliant question. Allah reward you for the bravery of asking this question. When you mentioned that it's okay to wear Western clothing while living in the West, what's your opinion about Muslim women wearing hijab? Doesn't it make us less approachable? So here's in a situation where we have like a very clear text from Quran and Sunnah, which we don't really go to it in that way. We don't say, well, maybe this, maybe that. You know, these kind of issues we hear and we obey. I'm not trying to make anyone feel bad. I'm just answering the question because it's not I don't have to wear hijab. I'm sure it's hard, right? For certain people, I'm sure it's a difficult thing. So I don't think we should be throwing people out of the community. I don't think we should be throwing out people out of leadership opportunities or participation opportunities because they don't wear hijab. That's ridiculous. Like I did in college. Right? But at the same time, something that's very clear in our tradition. And Allah help us all, man, and make us strong, man. And help us, you know, in our challenges. But also, hijab is not what identifies a Muslim woman 100%. Like, I have this issue with identity politics in our community, construction of beauty and femininity, which we don't have time to talk about. But, you know, man, just be you, man. Struggle. Just struggle. You know, and do what you got to do, but be part of the community. Thank you. The human mind is always full of thoughts. Okay, so the human mind is always full of thoughts. What are your suggestions regarding khushu during salah? I'm constantly thinking while I'm praying and feel my prayers are not accepted. Well, first of all, see, that's a utopia thing. Do you really think, man, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in all of His mercy and generosity, is not going to accept your prayers? Like, He's just going to throw your effort away? What do we read in Surah Idha Zulzila? فَمَنْ يَعْمَلْ مِثْقَالَ Whoever does an atom of the good is going to see it, right? But and this is the issue. When I go to Islamic schools and I do sometimes some consulting, and I see that the dominant theology for Muslim children is doom and gloom. Like you tell little kids, like God's not going to accept your good. Man, these are kids, man. Whereas instead of saying God is not going to accept your goods, we should say God loves you. God orders you to draw near. You can draw nearer to God by doing good. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is merciful. And then as they get older, and that responsibility comes into play, teach them about being responsible to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We've inverted it. Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam used to say to Mu'adh, Wallahi inni uhibbuk, wallahi inni uhibbuk. He brought the love to him first. He tied his heart. And Ibn Qayyim, when he was asked about love and fear, he said love is better than fear. Same with Al-Ghazali, radiyallahu anhuma. So the issue of khushu', you know, here's something really cool and empowering for you to hear. This is such a beautiful question because, quite frankly, I'll be honest with you, I've been having trouble with my khushu' these days. I have no idea why. So I want you to understand, you're not alone. You are not alone. Okay, I'm here with you. And, watch yourself. It's good DJ. And, secondly is, your imams are not perfect people. get off this stupid celebrity. These people are like, you know, the Avengers stuff. Because we're not. And if people ask you to look at them this way, stay away from them, man. You know, stay away from someone like that who always has to make sure you think they're perfect. So, I'll be honest with you, I got 99 problems, and khushu is one. So we have 99 names of Allah. That's how those 99 problems are. So the human mind is always full of thoughts. What are your suggestions regarding khushu? So there's a really, really good article online called, I think, 30 or 40 advices how to attain khushu. Read that article. It's a really good article. The other thing is there's a really great book. It's in Arabic. I don't know if it's translated. It's been translated in Egypt, but it's not a very good translation. It's called Mukhtasar Manhaj al-Qasidin. I think Omar Suleiman taught it over Maghrib. That has a chapter on khushu. If you hit me up on Twitter or Facebook, I'll send the name of the book to you. Inshallah. The other thing you can do, I heard from Sheikh Imran Hussein. Sheikh Imran Hussein is one of my teachers from Durban, South Africa. You know, one of the few Hanafis I studied. He's an incredible person. And he used to say to me that when you go to the mosque, start to pray before you get to the mosque. Like, turn off the radio, get off your cell phone, right? Start to make tasbih. So like, you know, like get your game face on, basically. Like get warmed up, right? You can't just jump into a workout, so you get your game face on. So what you should try to do, maybe this will help you, is start trying to get into the mind of Salah like 15 minutes before you know what to do. So you should be ready to go. The last question. Yeah, so this question is about institutions, the domestic war on terror, so we'll talk about that tomorrow, inshallah ta'ala. And the issues of foreign policy. And we'll talk about that tomorrow. I mean, here's something to think about as you go home now, and this is probably going to make people mad, you know what I mean? That's why it's the last thing I'm going to say. In Medina, was the Prophet constantly concerned about what was going on in Mecca or Medina? Or the Sahaba, all of them came from Mecca. Were they so consumed with what was happening in Mecca that they didn't do anything in Medina? No. But us, we identify ourselves till now by everything that happens overseas, at least in the other side of the border, where we are impotent to do anything for America. And that's why people don't like us. In fact, I had an activist tell me, you guys only come out when it's for you. You guys only come out when it's for you, man. He's like, but then when it happens, you want us all to show up for you guys. So I would say, just to think about this, if you are going to allow what's happening overseas to cause you to make moves here to the point that you do nothing, you are actually dressing your own coffin. If you allow certain things overseas, for example, if I'm invited to the White House dinner, I'm not going. Because of what happened last year. And I would say very clearly, like, this is why I'm not going to go. In my life, I'm not going because I don't want to violate BDS. Right? That's an issue. But to the point where it cripples us sometimes for having to make moves politically that are for the betterment of our local communities, I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that because we're all going to suffer, and our children will suffer, and our future will suffer. And that's the issue of masalih and, and mafasid. So we'll talk about that. I'm not a political science guy, so I might not touch on it, but I'll touch on the point I made now that in Medina, the Prophet, the first thing he did in Medina was drain a swamp. Well, the first thing he did in Medina was take a survey of everybody who lived in Medina, and then one of the first things he did was drain a swamp in Medina. He endeared himself to people, man. People felt he cared about them. That was a source of unhealthy sickness for the community he lived in. So, Jazakallah khair. We'll see you guys tomorrow. Thank you for coming. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you, Suhaib Webb, for your amazing lecture. So we have a gift on behalf of Western University's Muslim Students Association and the IAW committee. And Imam Suhaib Webb, if you want, you can open the gift and see what's inside.
Last time I remember, it's the same sweater.
And
So much. I have another one.
we had it embroidered to say
Okay.
Imam Suhaib Webb. And on that note, by the end of the weekend, we're going to convert you to a Toronto